What if you found out that the date you're about to go on will be life-changing? Would you decide to stay home, or would you take the risk? After all, you never know what lies ahead. Ready for a date. That's what Sydney wrote under her photo on social media. The picture showed a smiling, blue-eyed blonde with dimples on her cheeks. That date was supposed to change her life forever. And it did. That photo would be the last one of her life. Help this channel grow. Like the video, try the new hype feature, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories. This helps us a lot. Thank you. Sydney's parents, George and Sydney Loof, met during their college years. George was from Nebraska. No matter where he went, he always returned to his hometown, to the friendly atmosphere of a small community. After graduating from university with a master's degree in school administration, he eventually became the principal of Nalais High School, a town with a population of just over 1,500 people. In addition to this, George was passionate about coaching. He led the football team, taught driver's education, and much more. Susie was a special education teacher. The Loof couple had 3 children, Levi, Sydney, and Mackenzie. Sydney Loof was the middle child, born on August 21, 1993. The girl was bursting with energy. She had favorite TV shows, during which she would put together puzzles because she couldn't just sit on the couch and watch television. But this only happened after her parents managed to get her inside from playing outdoors. It was in the fresh air that Sydney truly came alive. In the summer, she rode bikes and ATVs with her brother, and in the winter she went sledding with her younger sister, climbed trees or ran around with her friends like crazy. In the gym, Sydney achieved great success. She was part of the basketball and track teams, and also played golf. Unfortunately, in her teenage years, the schoolgirl's life changed dramatically when she was diagnosed with scoliosis, a curvature of the spine. This meant she could no longer engage in physical activities. Her dreams of a sports career suddenly hit a serious obstacle. Even swinging a golf club caused the schoolgirl intense pain. Nevertheless, the girl always tried to stay positive and didn't let the condition break her. She found new hobbies, diving into them wholeheartedly. Sydney embraced her creative side, joining the theater group and participating in school plays. From a young age, she had a soft spot for animals and never missed a chance to bring home a new furry friend. She had a tiny, fluffy kitten she named Nimsy. Sydney was definitely a free-spirited person, and this was reflected in her tattoos. Each design on her body had its own story. On her arm were words from a favorite song, saying that one day everything would be wonderful. These words were a beacon of hope for the girl, a mantra that supported her even in tough times. And as tragic as it is, those same words would become a bittersweet reminder of all of Sydney's dreams and the life she wanted to live, but never got the chance to. So, after finishing high school, Sydney chose not to pursue further education in college, but decided to become independent. She got a job at a home goods store and rented an apartment in Lincoln, about 3 hours' drive from her family home. The high school graduate was ready for the next chapter of her life. Having her own place was not just a way to escape the small town, it was a chance to create her own space, both physically and psychologically. At work, Sydney earned a reputation as the kindest, most attentive, and caring person. She went out of her way to help anyone in need. For instance, in early 2017, one of her colleagues faced serious housing problems, and Sydney didn't hesitate to open her apartment door, offering him a place to stay. This was just one of the quiet, compassionate gestures that showed the breadth of her heart. Sydney tried to stick to certain rituals. Every evening around 10:30, she sent her mom a goodnight text. It was a small thing, but it showed how closely connected the girl was to her family. On Saturdays and Sundays, she often visited her parents, and the second weekend of November 2017 was no exception. On November 10th, Sydney went home and confided in her mom, Susie, about what was weighing on her. Lately, the girl had been struggling with mental health issues like depression and heightened anxiety. She was very concerned that the medications prescribed to her were ineffective. Susie was always ready to help. She immediately called and booked Sydney an appointment with a doctor. In reality, Loof wasn't alone. She had a group of wonderful friends, but at 24, Sydney was trying to find a true connection with herself and someone else who would understand her. She started exploring online dating sites and then signed up for the Tinder app, hoping that perhaps her perfect match was just a few steps away. On November 11th, while browsing profiles, Sydney came across an account belonging to a girl named Audrey. Their conversation felt fun and relaxed. The girls chatted about all sorts of things, discussed their interests, and shared opinions. They quickly found common ground and, within a couple of days, arranged to meet in person. On November 14th, Audrey picked Sydney up at her apartment. They drove around the city and talked, getting to know each other in a casual setting. By the end of the evening, Audrey drove Sydney home and later sent a text. "Good night, beautiful." It sounded like a promising end to their first date. Sydney was in great spirits. She felt a surge of energy, excitement, and anticipation from meeting her new acquaintance. The girl checked her phone again and saw a message from her childhood friend, Brooklyn McChrystal, which she had apparently missed, caught up in the wave of new impressions. Sydney apologized for the late reply and told Brooklyn about her date with Audrey, whom she met on Tinder. She shared all the details and mentioned that Audrey was 25. She was very sweet and fun. The girl even sent her friend a few photos of Audrey. Then Sydney chatted a bit with her colleague Tara. Loof was in high spirits and eager to share her feelings with everyone. She admitted to her colleague that she was worried about her new acquaintance. She feared that Audrey was actually in a relationship with a man, and they were just looking for a third person for intimate encounters. The thing is, Sydney had already fallen into this trap before. Meeting another girl often ended with an invitation to join a couple in bed, but Loof wasn't interested in a threesome and hoped Audrey was genuinely interested in her without any hidden motives. On November 15th, after finishing her shift at the store, Sydney stopped by her apartment, changed, and went on another date with her new friend. That day, Loof planned to clarify the situation. She really liked Audrey. She understood her from the first word, as if they had known each other forever, and it felt like a good sign. Before leaving, Sydney took a moment to snap a selfie for Snapchat, showing off her outfit for the evening, a white blazer and a cream blouse. She looked happy, confident, and ready for whatever the night might bring. Her mom, Susie, saw her daughter's photo and immediately felt uneasy. In their conversation the day before, Sydney hadn't mentioned anything about an upcoming date, so Susie took a screenshot of the photo and asked her daughter what date she was talking about. The silence on the other end of the line began to feel unsettling. At first, it seemed like typical behavior for a 24-year-old independent girl having a good time. But Susie, aware of her daughter's mental health struggles, grew worried and tried calling her several times. However, Sydney continued to ignore the calls. The next day, November 16th, when Sydney didn't show up for work, her colleagues grew concerned. They knew Loof wouldn't miss a shift without a reason. Susie's worry intensified as she still hadn't heard from her daughter. They had spoken with Sydney on Wednesday afternoon, and now it was Thursday evening. The girl hadn't sent her usual good-night text, and breaking this small tradition felt abnormal and wrong to her mother. Sydney had never been so distant before. Susie wondered if her daughter's mental health issues had worsened, and perhaps she just didn't want to talk to anyone. The woman spent the day preparing dinner for an event she had planned for the evening, but her thoughts kept circling back to Sydney and her silence. With each passing minute, a mother's intuition told her something was wrong with her daughter, that something had happened, something terrible. The concern grew among Loof's colleagues as well. They contacted her sister, Mackenzie, and explained that Sydney hadn't shown up for work, hadn't called, and hadn't warned anyone about her absence, and now she wasn't responding to texts or calls. Mackenzie immediately told her parents, Susie and George, that no one could reach Sydney and that she had missed her shift at the store. Susie's heart sank. She had been worried before, but now a wave of real fear washed over her. On Friday, November 17th, Sydney's father and mother got in the car and made the long, anxiety-filled drive to Lincoln, imagining the worst possible scenarios of what might have happened to their daughter. They desperately needed answers. When they arrived at Sydney's apartment, their worry deepened. Their daughter's car was parked right in the driveway, but no one answered the door. Susie and George couldn't take it anymore and called the police. They entered Sydney's apartment with the officers, hoping to find a clue that would reassure them. Instead, the parents found her cat, Nimsy. Her bowls were empty, with no food or water left. Everyone knew Sydney adored her pet and would never leave Nimsy to suffer from hunger or thirst. The apartment was eerily quiet. The girl's purse was on the kitchen table, but her phone, wallet, and keys were gone. It seemed like Sydney had stepped out for a moment and then simply vanished into thin air. The ringing silence of the apartment suddenly hit everyone with the realization that this wasn't just a misunderstanding. Something terrible had happened to Sydney. George was gripped by fear for his child. He kept thinking his daughter would show up any moment with some wild story or at least send a message saying she was safe. But as more time passed, the anxiety only grew. Susie clung to a thread of hope that everything would soon be resolved, but that thread kept slipping from her grasp. The parents faced their worst nightmare, unsure where to begin searching for their daughter. Susie turned to prayer and the support of her tight-knit community. Close family friends rallied around the grieving parents, offering comfort and help in the search. Sydney's disappearance sent a wave of emotion through her small town. People came together to show unity. On Sunday, a candlelight vigil was held. Local residents gathered on the high school football field to pray and hold on to hope for Sydney's safe return to her family. No one wanted to believe the unthinkable, but with each passing hour, the fear for the girl grew. Everyone hoped for a miracle, but it didn't come. As the days dragged on in endless emotional pain, Sydney's father, George, spoke to the cameras, addressing his daughter directly and the people who might be holding her against her will. He entertained the possibility that she had been kidnapped. Students at the school where Sydney studied pinned green ribbons to their backpacks. Neighbors and many townspeople tied strips of green fabric to fence rails and posts. Each fluttering ribbon symbolized a quiet prayer for Sydney Loof's well-being. Social media accounts were filled with photos of the missing girl. All this showed that Loof wasn't just a missing person. She was a beloved daughter, sister, and friend. Thanksgiving weekend was approaching. The Loof family home filled with relatives who dropped everything to come and help find Sydney. They distributed flyers, posting them in stores, at gas stations, anywhere they might be seen. The flyers highlighted the missing girl's key features: height of 5 feet 8 inches, weight of 135 pounds, blonde hair, blue eyes, and distinctive tattoos. They also listed the clothing she was last seen wearing. The selfie she took before leaving home helped. Sydney's friend, Brooklyn McChrystal, knew they had to act quickly. While the police and parents were searching, she decided to investigate her friend's disappearance on her own. She found the photo of Audrey, the new picture Sydney had sent her, and signed up for Tinder. Brooklyn set the dating app to search for women aged 25 in Lincoln. Her heart was pounding as she scrolled through endless photos, trying to find someone who looked like Audrey. And then, like a bolt of lightning, it hit her. In one of the photos, she saw a familiar face. Without a doubt, it was her, the same Audrey that Sydney had gone on a date with. This was a real lead to the last known person who saw Loof alive. Brooklyn took a shaky breath and, without wasting time, immediately messaged Audrey. Adrenaline was surging. This could be the breakthrough they desperately needed. Perhaps this girl could provide answers and reveal where Sydney might have gone. Brooklyn started a conversation and chatted with Audrey long enough to get her phone number. She then passed the number to Sydney's family, who immediately informed the Lincoln police. Time was a critical factor for the police department. Every new piece of information could bring them one step closer to finding Sydney. Detectives traced the phone number. It turned out it belonged to a 23-year-old woman named Bailey Boswell. Bailey lived in Wilbur, Nebraska. Investigators already knew that Sydney's phone last pinged in Wilbur before it was turned off or died. And now there was a direct link connecting Audrey to the very place where Loof's trail went cold. As the investigation progressed, the police learned more about this girl, Bailey Boswell. She lived in a basement apartment with her 51-year-old partner, Aubrey Trail. There was no Audrey. The photo on the Tinder account was of Bailey, a 23-year-old woman who was dating a man named Aubrey, nearly 30 years her senior. All these discrepancies with the photo, the fake name, and the significant age difference suggested something was amiss. The police found the situation suspicious. On November 18, 2017, officers went to the address in Wilbur, hoping to speak with Bailey and Aubrey. They knocked on the basement apartment door, but got no response. This made them nervous, especially since time was passing, and there was still no word from Sydney Loof. Given what was at stake, the detectives turned to the landlord, Alan Cole, who lived in the main part of the building with his family, and asked him to tell them about the basement tenants. Alan explained that Aubrey Trail and his girlfriend Bailey introduced themselves as antique dealers from Falls City. Trail even gifted the landlord a few porcelain dolls for his grandchildren. Aubrey did most of the talking while Bailey was quiet and reserved. The man had a habit of talking loudly in the basement, sometimes audible upstairs. There were no other complaints about them as tenants. They always paid on time. However, a very different picture emerged after the officers spoke with Alan's adult daughter, Jennifer. She shared a story that made everyone uneasy. Something didn't quite match the image of polite antique dealers, and it was enough to raise suspicions about the couple. Jennifer Cole recounted that late on November 15th, something strange caught her attention. The young woman lived in a separate basement apartment in the same building where Bailey Boswell and Aubrey Trail stayed. While playing with her son, they both noticed a very strong smell. They immediately realized it was bleach. Cole was allergic to chlorine, and even a faint smell made her feel ill. But this was an outright stench. The woman couldn't understand why anyone would need to use so much bleach, especially late at night. When Jennifer and her son returned home the next evening after a day out, the smell was unbearable. The bleach stung their eyes and noses as if it were burning their lungs. Despite it being mid-November, the woman opened the windows and doors to air out the apartment. As she walked down the stairs and past the door where Bailey and Aubrey lived, the smell grew even stronger, as if someone had spilled bleach everywhere, soaking into the floors and walls. That amount of bleach wasn't used even for a deep clean, so what could it have been needed for? On November 18th, with a key provided by the landlord Alan Cole, the police were able to enter Bailey and Aubrey's basement apartment. The smell of bleach still lingered in the air, even though 3 days had passed. But the odor was the only thing that raised suspicion. Without a search warrant, the investigators' hands were tied. They could only look around, but weren't allowed to move anything, shift furniture, or open drawers. One room was thoroughly cleaned, with washed walls, while the rest of the apartment looked dirty and cluttered. It seemed like the occupants had left in a hurry. As a result, the investigation was delayed by another day. The detectives approached the district attorney, explained the intense bleach smell in Boswell and Trail's apartment, and obtained a search warrant. On November 19th, with official documents in hand, they returned to the basement apartment in Wilbur, determined to conduct a thorough and methodical search of the premises. On one hand, there was no direct evidence that Sydney Loof had died at the hands of the apartment's residents. But on the other, there were several suspicious items that raised alarm. Among the items found was a note detailing step-by-step instructions for encrypting a cell phone. This could mean someone was trying to hide something. Why else encrypt phone records? Then the team found a receipt from a store, dated November 15th. At 5 in the evening, someone from the apartment had purchased several baking sheets and duct tape. On their own, these purchases weren't incriminating as Thanksgiving was approaching. But in the context of the investigation, they seemed dubious. The timing of the purchases was also suspicious. November 15th was the very evening when the landlord's daughter, Jennifer, noticed the pungent bleach smell, and when Sydney went on a date with the girl named Audrey, who was actually Bailey. So this was just another piece of the puzzle falling into place. The investigators then found another receipt. This time, the purchases were made at 11:30 a.m. on November 16th. The receipt showed the purchase of a gallon of bleach and trash bags. These were no longer random household items, but tools someone could use to conceal evidence and clean a crime scene. Bleach containers found in the laundry area, one empty and another half full, lent more weight to this theory. Another find sent chills down their spines, a book titled The Atlas of the Human Body. At first glance, it was a standard human anatomy reference book. However, given the circumstances of Sydney Loof's disappearance, the police couldn't help but wonder what purpose the book served for two antique dealers. Before concluding the search, investigators took a gray bedsheet, as it might contain DNA or other physical evidence. Hair fibers, bodily fluids, anything that could explain what had happened in that apartment earlier. Now the detectives just had to piece it all together. The bleach-soaked air, suspicious receipts, encryption instructions, and Sydney's absence. All of this pointed to a possible crime, a violent, premeditated act. The investigators left the apartment, taking the evidence with them. By Wednesday, November 29th, the Lincoln Police Department believed they had enough evidence to make a public statement. Authorities declared 51-year-old Aubrey Trail and 23-year-old Bailey Boswell persons of interest in the case. In response to this statement, the couple held a live broadcast on social media, claiming their innocence and insisting they had nothing to do with the girl's disappearance. The video lasted about 9 minutes and looked like it was filmed in a rush. In the footage, a woman dressed head to toe in black, wearing dark sunglasses, sat next to a man in a car. According to Bailey, she and Sydney had gone on a couple of dates. On the evening of November 15th, they drove around and smoked weed, after which Boswell dropped Loof off at her friend's house. They had planned to go to a casino over the weekend, but Sydney didn't call. Then the man sitting next to her spoke. Aubrey confirmed Bailey's story and expressed hope for the missing girl's swift return home. He literally prayed for Loof to be found safe and sound soon and said he was very worried about her. The couple acted as if they were genuinely surprised by the suspicions against them and tried to dispel the police's doubts. The story of Sydney Loof's disappearance gripped not only Nebraska, but spread across the country. The names Bailey Boswell and Aubrey Trail were mentioned in connection with the girl's disappearance. The Lincoln Police Department was flooded with tips, some worth pursuing, others sounding like poorly thought-out legends. The department was so overwhelmed that they had to assign a dedicated officer to verify all incoming information. One tip caught the investigators' attention. It came from a hotel in Spencer, Nebraska, located nearly 4 hours from Lincoln. The manager recognized Bailey and Aubrey's faces and reported that the couple had checked into the hotel, paying in cash. The next day, they checked out. On November 28th, a front desk clerk at a hotel in Iowa also saw Boswell and Trail's faces in the news and contacted the police hotline. When local law enforcement arrived at the hotel, Bailey and Aubrey had vanished again. They left in such a hurry that they abandoned a cane and a couple of bags. The bags contained maps of Iowa and Mexico. The couple's movements from one state to another looked like an attempt to flee the country. While the pair continued to move between cities, FBI agents followed the digital trail left by Bailey and Aubrey. According to phone records, on the evening of November 15th, Sydney was preparing to meet Audrey, aka Bailey. Before the date, Loof sent a cautious, slightly nervous message. She wanted to be absolutely certain they would be alone. There should be no unexpected third parties at their date. Bailey promised to meet the conditions and at 6:54 p.m. sent a message saying she was waiting for Sydney in the car outside her house. FBI agents cracked over 1,000 IP addresses and phone numbers linked to the device used to upload the couple's social media video. It was meticulous and painstaking work in cyberspace. Tracking the suspects was intense. Eventually, experts zeroed in on a burner phone number used to post the video. Every new piece of information tightened the net around Bailey and Aubrey. The missing girl's family prayed that law enforcement's efforts would yield results. A nationwide manhunt was issued, and the stakes were high. Loved ones awaited the case's resolution, and the public demanded justice. In the early morning hours of December 13th, U.S. Marshals, acting on warrants, tracked down and arrested Aubrey Trail and Bailey Boswell at a motel in Branson, Missouri. They were charged with fraud-related offenses, as there wasn't enough evidence to detain them in connection with Sydney Loof's case. It turned out that Bailey and Aubrey had an extensive criminal history, check fraud, theft, and various other scams, mostly targeting antique stores across different states, but nothing violent. The Lincoln Police Department chief speculated that the missing girl might still be alive. This gave her loved ones hope. Aubrey and Bailey were in custody, while investigators worked around the clock. They meticulously analyzed cell phone records, plotted points on a map to track Aubrey and Bailey's movements. Reviewing surveillance footage, detectives discovered that on November 16th, the day after Sydney's disappearance, Aubrey and Bailey left their Wilbur apartment in the morning and returned around 6 in the evening. By tracking phone signals from tower to tower, police noticed that the couple's car stopped in a rural area near an isolated gravel road. Armed with this alarming clue, on December 4th, about 50 law enforcement officers headed to the location. They painstakingly combed the area, inspecting ditches and bushes. The day was cold, and the atmosphere was tense. The officers knew what they might find, but still hoped for a positive outcome, until a signal came about a discovery. In one of the ditches along the gravel road lay several trash bags. It didn't take the police long to realize they had stumbled upon human remains. No one said it aloud, but everyone understood that these were likely the remains of the missing Sydney Loof. The officers standing there amidst the bleak rural landscape were professionals, but above all, they were human. Their hearts broke at the realization that these were the remains of someone's daughter, sister, and friend. Their hopes of finding Sydney alive collapsed in an instant, replaced by a firm resolve to seek justice for this girl and her family. Experts were called to the crime scene. In the trash bags, they found a right arm with a familiar tattoo. "Everything will be wonderful." It was the inscription Sydney proudly wore on her body, a symbol of her hope and faith in the future. But now, this hopeful phrase became a painful confirmation of her identity. In addition to the remains, investigators found other evidence: a map fragment, some of Sydney's clothing, latex gloves, a bedsheet, and a blood-stained shower curtain. All of this hinted at the horrifying end of the young woman's life. However, not all remains were found. The victim's left arm and internal organs were never recovered. That evening, the tragic news spread rapidly online. Exhausted by fruitless searches, the Loof family finally learned that Sydney would never come home. 3 days after the initial search, investigators found more evidence scattered along Highway 41 in Nebraska. It seemed as though someone had simply thrown these items out of a moving car's passenger window. They found Sydney's driver's license, cut into several pieces, fragments of her cell phone, a pair of men's underwear, a green 4XL t-shirt splattered with strange white stains, a size 8.5 shoe, a green glove, and 2 men's socks. All the items were discarded in a hurry. The white stains on the clothing turned out to be bleach splatter. An autopsy of Sydney's body fragments revealed that she had likely been restrained or bound. Scratches on her back and elbows suggested she had resisted. Her earlobe was torn. This injury was inflicted shortly before her death. Although parts of her neck, including the hyoid bone, were missing, the coroner concluded that the cause of death was strangulation. Combining all the collected evidence, comparing some DNA samples, and matching timelines, investigators were able to link Sydney Loof's disappearance to the couple, Bailey Boswell and Aubrey Trail. However, a massive amount of work remained to prove it. The parking lot of the Lutheran church was packed with cars an hour before the service began. Vehicles lined the nearby streets, taking up nearly the entire block. Sydney's colleagues were given the day off to say goodbye. The weather that day matched the general mood. It was cold, gray, and overcast. 3 days after the funeral, on December 14th, Aubrey Trail and Bailey Boswell appeared in court for preliminary hearings, and one of them pleaded not guilty. Who were Bailey and Aubrey, and what did they want from Sydney Loof? Bailey Boswell was born on February 26, 1994. When she was just 2 years old, a tragedy struck her family. Her father was brutally murdered. Due to her young age, Bailey didn't comprehend this, so she had a relatively normal childhood. She excelled in track and was an outstanding basketball player. Boswell even earned a scholarship to play basketball in college. It was during her college years that her life turned upside down when she was subjected to sexual assault. To make matters worse, her college basketball coach was a deeply unpleasant person. For some reason, he took a dislike to Bailey and constantly sought to humiliate her in front of the team. These factors had a profound impact on the student and her self-esteem. She found no support from those close to her and, to cope, turned to illegal substances and alcohol. Caught in the grip of addiction, Bailey entered a highly toxic and abusive relationship with a young man who turned out to be a true monster. He repeatedly beat her, humiliated her, and subjected her to sexual punishment. As a result of this relationship, Bailey became pregnant. The child was placed in the care of her parents, as both she and the baby's father struggled with substance abuse. By age 22, Boswell had been arrested multiple times for various offenses related to her addiction. Her life was spiraling downward. Her parents said Bailey had become a completely different person. She was no longer the bright, happy girl who had left for college. College had completely broken her, leaving her cold and empty, and things only got worse. Her husband began selling Bailey's body for money, driving her to various hotels for meetings with clients, and then picking her up. The young woman didn't see a cent of the money she earned. All of this took a terrible toll on Boswell's mental health. She suffered from depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. Eventually, Bailey found the strength to leave her husband and escape that horrific situation. However, a lack of means to support herself forced her to offer sexual services in exchange for financial support. She was looking for a so-called sponsor to support her. Soon, a man named Aubrey contacted her. That's how Bailey fell into the clutches of another cruel monster. Only this time, she became a willing participant in what followed. Aubrey Trail was born on September 7, 1966. He too had a difficult childhood. At 2 years old, the boy was sent to live with his grandparents, but this didn't last long as his mother remarried. Aubrey was returned to his mother and stepfather. Due to constant abuse, he ran away from home and drifted from one foster family to another. His legal troubles began in his teens. The boy stole, vandalized property, and struggled with substance abuse. Trail was repeatedly sent to juvenile correctional facilities until, at 17, he was imprisoned for armed robbery. After that, he ended up behind bars multiple times for theft, fraud, and writing bad checks. He bought fake antiques and sold them as genuine. Or he purchased real antiques but paid with fake checks that couldn't be cashed. This was how he earned most of his money, and it was substantial. Aubrey and Bailey settled into a basement apartment in Wilbur in mid-2017. It didn't take long for Bailey to start helping her older boyfriend with all his scams. They became a true criminal duo. The relationship between Bailey and Aubrey progressed. The man began imposing his sexual fantasies on the girl, which were far from ordinary. The thing is, Aubrey liked to consider himself a vampire. He also had a fetish for drinking blood. What turned him on most was sexual relationships with witches, so he convinced his young partner that she was the head of a witch's coven. Aubrey wanted to have many women under his control and believed that sleeping with witches was his God-given right. So he decided to bring his perverse fantasies to life and create his own cult. Aubrey wanted to have many women who would follow him and do whatever he wanted. Trail even devised rules that the women had to follow. He demanded they call him Daddy Vampire. His subjects were not allowed to interact with other men and had to engage in sexual acts with him on demand. To speed things up, he forced them to stay naked in the apartment. Aubrey targeted only vulnerable girls who could be easily manipulated with financial support. To recruit so-called witches for his coven, Trail turned to the Tinder dating app. He created a fake profile, using Bailey's photo as the avatar. The man used various names, not just Audrey. Once a woman fell into his trap, he tried to lure her into his cult, posing as Bailey. At one point, Trail had 3 young women under his control, not counting Bailey. He gave them pocket money, took them to the mall, treated them to dinner, and simply enjoyed life. It would have been fine if the man's fantasies had stopped there. But now Aubrey wanted more, to take someone's life. This became his new favorite topic of conversation. According to Trail, only by taking a life could one become a true witch. These talks about death scared the girls, and they left Aubrey's home. Before they left, the man threatened them. If anyone learned of his plans, he would send not only the talkative girls to the other side, but their entire families as well. The captives left and tried to forget everything they had seen and heard. Meanwhile, Aubrey and Bailey continued searching for a new victim. That's when the couple came across Sydney Loof's profile. In mid-January 2018, the court issued over a dozen charges against Boswell and Trail, but they were unrelated to Sydney's murder. The charges were tied to the couple's complex fraud scheme. Since Aubrey and Bailey refused to plead guilty, they remained in custody. While in a high-security detention center, Aubrey admitted in a phone call with his partner that he was responsible for Sydney Loof's death. His story changed several times, ranging from causing accidental harm to sexual strangulation. Trail called Sydney's death a tragic accident that was never meant to happen, claiming he was simply afraid to go to the police and confess, believing the authorities would condemn them without giving them a fair chance to explain the true situation. Later, Trail declared that he deserved life imprisonment or the death penalty for what he had done. On March 22nd, several months after Loof's disappearance, the search for evidence continued. Law enforcement officers kept combing the roadside near where the girl's body was found. During the search, one officer stumbled upon the white top Sydney was wearing in her last Snapchat photo and a colorful bra with a cut. Over time, investigators recovered a total of 14 parts of Sydney's body. On June 11, 2018, the Nebraska Attorney General's office finally charged Aubrey Trail and Bailey Boswell with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit assault, and improper disposal of human remains. According to sworn testimony, Bailey, posing as Audrey on Tinder, misled Sydney and lured her into a deadly trap. At first, Trail hesitated but eventually agreed to talk. During an intense 3-hour interrogation, Aubrey revealed horrifying details of the girl's death. Unlike the detectives, Trail spoke calmly and detachedly, sipping coffee slowly. He claimed the entire situation arose from his sexual fantasy that simply went wrong. He offered Sydney $5,000 to participate in a party, but things spiraled out of control when he strangled her with an extension cord for erotic purposes. The girl stopped breathing. Trail panicked, dismembered the body, and disposed of it to avoid getting caught. The prisoner insisted he hadn't intended to kill the girl, claiming her death was an accident. But the calm way he described the dismemberment process suggested otherwise. In concluding his story, Aubrey assured the police that Bailey Boswell had no part in the party. She only helped dispose of the body. However, the claim that Loof's death was an accident during consensual sex didn't align with the evidence. First, Sydney had insisted there be no men at the date. Second, surveillance cameras at a hardware store captured the criminal couple, Aubrey and Bailey, buying a hacksaw, tin snips, a utility knife, and trash bags a few hours before the scheduled date. This was perhaps the most compelling evidence of premeditated crime. While Bailey and Aubrey were in jail awaiting trial, authorities uncovered encrypted messages they exchanged to coordinate their stories. In the messages, Trail insisted on taking the blame and said it was important to portray Boswell as a victim. In June 2019, Aubrey Trail stood trial. In addition to digital and forensic evidence, the prosecution also had testimony from 3 witnesses whose identities were kept confidential. These were the girls who had previously been part of the witches' cult created by Trail. They recounted how the man planned to kill someone, record it on camera, and sell the video for a hefty sum. Aubrey also claimed to have supernatural abilities, like flying and reading minds. While these stories sounded like the ravings of a madman, that's how he presented himself. At this point, the trial took an even stranger turn. While one of the witnesses was testifying, Trail jumped up, shouted that Bailey was innocent, and cursed everyone else, and slashed his throat with a makeshift blade. He was immediately carried out of the courtroom and loaded into an ambulance. Trail survived the apparent suicide attempt, and the trial continued. As soon as he recovered and returned to the courtroom, he delivered another surprise. He retracted all his previous statements, calling them nonsense. He said there was no video, no sexual fantasies, and it all happened by accident. No matter how the defense tried to portray Aubrey as a man with a broken fate, when the jury saw the graphic photos of Sydney's remains, their opinion of Trail was sealed. The trial lasted 3 weeks, during which Aubrey suffered 2 heart attacks and a stroke. But in the end, the jury delivered a guilty verdict on all counts. On June 9, 2021, Trail was sentenced to death. As it turned out, Sydney Loof didn't die as a result of erotic games. She was killed simply for refusing to join Aubrey Trail's group and threatening to expose him. He knew from Bailey about the girl's character and understood she would follow through on her threat. Trail didn't want to lose the life he and Boswell were living, so he took an extension cord and tightened it around Sydney Loof's neck. That's what the defendant confessed to before hearing his sentence. Boswell stood trial in September 2020. Her trial was far less dramatic, but there was also substantial evidence against her. Prosecutors sought the death penalty, and on the day of sentencing, Bailey tearfully begged the court not to impose the death penalty for the sake of her 7-year-old daughter. Boswell was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Aubrey Trail is currently on death row in Nebraska. He has access to a tablet and has created a prisoner profile, despite the severity of his crime. On his page, he talks about himself and invites people to correspond with him. The Sydney Loof case became a powerful warning about personal safety and the potential risks of online dating. Don't forget that behind the profile of a charming stranger, a real monster might be hiding. Stay safe. If you have finished watching, you are a real fan of true crime. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell notifications, and put the like. See you in the next video.